Hello, so in this word, God says they're watching you, really watching you, so closely it's as though you're under a microscope. And he says, though, do not fear and do not fret over anything. And so he's given me scripture, which comes from chapter 21 of the Quran. So we're going to start at verse 30, which actually begins on page 293, but God gave it to me at page 200. I meant to say 223, right? So it begins on 923. However, he gave it to me at 924. And so section 3 of the chapter reads from verse 30, do not the unbelievers see that the heavens and the earth were joined together as one unit of creation before we clove them asunder? We made them from water, every living thing. Will they not then believe? And we have set on the earth mountains, standing firm, lest it should shake with them. And we have made therein broad highways between mountains for them to pass through, that they may find their way. And we have made the heavens as a canopy well guarded, yet do they turn away from the signs which these things point to. It is he who created the night and the day, and the sun and the moon, all the celestial bodies, swimming along each in its rounded course. We granted not to any man before thee permanent life. Here if then thou shouldst die, would they live permanently? Every soul shall have a taste of death, and we test you by evil and by good, by way of trial. To us must ye return. When the unbelievers see thee, they treat thee not except with ridicule. It is, they say, the one who talks of your gods, and they blaspheme at the mention of the most gracious. Man is a creature of haste. Soon enough will I show you my signs, so ask me not to hasten them. They say, when will this promise come to pass, if you are telling the truth? If only the unbelievers knew the time when they will not be able to ward off the fire from their faces, nor yet from their backs, and when no help can reach them. Nay, it may come to them all of a sudden, and confound them. No power will they have then to avert it, nor will they then get respite. Mocked were many messengers before thee, but their scoffers were hemmed in by the things that they mocked. And the following section 4 reads, say who can keep you safe by night and by day from the wrath of the most gracious? Yet they turn away from the remembrance of their Lord. Or have they gods, lowercase g, that can guard them from us? They have no power to aid themselves, nor can they be defended from us. Nay, we have the good things of this life to these men and their fathers until the period grew long for them. See they not that we gradually reduce the land in their control from its outlying borders? Is it then they who will win? Say, I do but warn you according to revelation, but the deaf will not hear the call, even when they are warned. If but a breath of the wrath of thy Lord do touch them, they will then say, woe to us, we did wrong indeed. We shall set up scales of justice for the day of judgment, so that not a soul will be dealt with unjustly in the least. And if there be no more than the weight of a mustard seed, we will bring it to account, and enough are we to take account. In the past we granted to Moses and Aaron the criterion for judgment, and a light and a message for those who would do right, those who fear their Lord in their most secret thoughts, and who hold the hour of judgment in awe. And this is a blessed message which we have sent down. Will you then reject it? And in section 5, we bestowed aforetime on Abraham his rectitude of conduct, and well were we acquainted with him. Behold, he said to his father and his people, what are these images to which you are so assiduously devoted? They say, we found our fathers worshipping them. He said, indeed, you have been in manifest error, you and your fathers. They say, have you brought us the truth, or are you one of those who jests? He said, no, nay, your Lord is the Lord of the heavens and the earth, he who created them from nothing, and I am a witness to this truth. And by God I will certainly plan against your idols after you go away and turn your backs. So he broke them to pieces, all but the biggest of them, that they might turn and address themselves to it. They said, "Who has done this to our gods? He must indeed be one of the unjust ones." They said, "We heard a youth talk of them. He is called Abraham." They said, "Then bring him before the eyes of the people, that they may bear witness." They said, "Art thou the one that did this with our gods, O Abraham?" He said, "Nay, this was done by this, the biggest one. Ask them if they can talk." So they turned to themselves and said, "Surely you are the ones in the wrong." Then were they confounded with shame. They said, "Thou knowest full well that these idols do not speak." Abraham said, "Do you then worship besides God things that can neither be of any good to you nor do you any harm? Fie upon you and upon the things that you worship besides God. Have you no sense?" They said, "Burn him and protect your lowercase g gods, if you do anything at all." We said, "O fire, be thou cool and a means of safety for Abraham." Then they planned against him, but we made them the greater losers. But we delivered him and his nephew Lot, and directed them to the land which we have blessed for the nations. And we bestowed on him Isaac and an additional gift, a grandson Jacob, and we made righteous men out of every one of them. And we made them leaders, guiding men by our command, and we inspired them to do good deeds, to establish regular prayers, and to give charity, and they constantly served us, and us only. And to Lot too we gave judgment and knowledge, and we saved him from the town which practiced abominations. Truly they were a people given to evil, a rebellious people, and we admitted him to our mercy, for he was one of the righteous. And so, yesterday I kept seeing the number 144 a lot, and I also saw 411, and then a couple of prophets on YouTube really confirmed this for me when they were talking about how God is going to increase our gifts, and we are going to become almost superhuman-like. And, he has already, like Joseph, given us a versatility in our gifts, in the way that Joseph was gifted a rainbow coat almost. And so the Lord is also going to increase this versatility and increase the kind of influence and dynamic quality to these attributes as we become more holy, and we are filled with more light, and we are he releases us to fulfill his will upon this earth more completely, because while we are striving for the advancement of civilization, we are not striving in the same way that the world strives for technological advancement. God's advancement of technology, we should find a better term, is so much more advanced. And even these technological advancements, we understand that there are many more advancements than what has been released at present to the current time and culture. And so these things have already been achieved, and they're just bestowed on these individuals. And so why cannot God bestow upon us these glorious and much more glorious kind of manifestations to improve human civilization? And so the Lord says only those who really have eyes to see and ears to hear can understand and discern between events and facts and what they think they know. And so I hope this word really helps, and I'm going to continue reading, because there is no need for us to pigeonhole ourselves into anything when God is going to gloriously and magnificently bestow or lay out a whole feast before our enemies, right? He's going to set a table before our enemies, and he says the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And he also says to not pay attention to the physical, right? Because faith is you striving for and believing in the evidence of things not yet seen, right? And things usually get worse before they get better, because it's just the resistance in the physical to what is being manifest. And then these are the birthing pangs. And so we need to stay steadfast, because we don't need to see consistent and continual, even though the Lord does regularly release these things to us, signs and wonders, and he continues to pour into us and guide us along. But we already have so much evidence in our lives, and we ourselves know what we've experienced and what we've had to overcome since our youth, and how we've carried these gifts since then. And so we know what we're building with the Lord, and so only we know what determines our destiny. And then it continues in section 6. Remember Noah when he cried to us aforetime. We listened to his prayer and delivered him and his family from great distress. We helped him against people who rejected our signs. Truly they were a people given to evil. So we drowned them in the flood altogether. And remember David and Solomon when they gave judgment in the matter of the field into which the sheep of certain people had strayed by night. We did witness their judgment. To Solomon we inspired the right understanding of the matter. To each of them we gave judgment and knowledge. It was our power that made the hills and the birds celebrate our praises. With David, it was we who did all these things. They cannot take credit for what God is doing, and so that's why we cannot get their support. That's why we cannot fit into their system. It was we who taught him the making of coats of mail for your benefit, to guard you from each other's violence. Will you then be ungrateful? It's God is the one that is giving us these gifts and is releasing the full capacity of them. And so no one and others, when we exhibited just an aspect of our potential, they felt threatened by it. And so there's no way that the world and anything in it can take credit for what God is doing in this hour and at this time. It was our power that made the violent, unruly wind flow tamely for Solomon to his order, to the land which we had blessed, for we do know all things. And of Satan's were some who dived for him and did other work besides, and it was we who guarded them. And remember Job when he cried to his Lord, truly distress has seized me, but thou art the most merciful of those that are merciful. So we listened to him, we removed the distress that was on him, and we restored his people to him, and doubled their number as a grace from ourselves, and a thing for commemoration for all who serve us. And remember Ishmael, Idris, and Zulkifl, all men of constancy and patience. And that's really what God is really demanding and requesting from us. We admitted them to our mercy, for they were of the righteous ones. And remember Zunun, and he departed in wrath. He imagined that we had no power over him, but he cried through the depths of darkness, there is no God but thou. Glory to thee, I was indeed wrong. So we listened to him and delivered him from distress, and thus do we deliver those who have faith. And remember Zechariah when he cried to his Lord, O my Lord, leave me not without offspring, though thou art the best of inheritors. So we listened to him, and we granted him Yahya. We cured his wife's barrenness for him. These three were ever quick in doing in good works. They used to call on us in yearning and awe, and humble themselves before us. And remember her who guarded her chastity. We breathed into her from our spirit, and we made her and her son a sign for all peoples. And so this is the legacy that we follow. So verily this ummah, this family, this nation of yours, is a single ummah. And I am your Lord and cherisher, therefore serve me and no other. But later generations cut off their affair of unity, one from another, yet will they all return to us. And section 7, whoever works any act of righteousness and has faith, his endeavor will not be rejected. We shall record it in his favor. But there is a ban on any population which we have destroyed, that they shall not return, until the Gog and Magog people are let through their barrier, and they swiftly swarm from every hill. Then will the true promise draw nigh to fulfillment. Then behold, the eyes of the unbelievers will fixedly stare in horror. Ah, woe to us, we were indeed heedless of this, nay, we truly did wrong. Verily you, unbelievers, and the false gods that you worship besides the true God, Allah, are but fuel for hell. To it will you surely come. If these had been gods, lowercase g, they would not have got there. but each one will abode therein. Their sobbing will be their lot, nor will they there hear aught else. Those for whom the good from us has gone before will be removed far therefrom. Not the slightest sound will they hear of hell. What their souls desired, in that will they dwell. The greatest terror will bring them no grief, but the angels will meet them with mutual greetings. This is your day, the day that you were promised, the day that we rolled up the heavens like a scroll, rolled up for books completed, even as we produced the first creation. So shall we produce a new one, a promise we have undertaken, truly shall we fulfill it. Before this we wrote in the Psalms, after the message given to Moses, my servants, the righteous, shall inherit the earth. Verily, in this Quran is a message for people who truly worship God. We sent thee not, but as a mercy for all creatures. Say, what has come to me, but by inspiration, is that your God is one God. Will you therefore bow to his will in Islam? But if they turn back, say, I have proclaimed the message to you all alike, and in truth, but I know not whether that which you are promised is near or far. It is he who knows what is open in speech and what you hide in your hearts. I know not but that it may be a trial for you, and a grant of worldly livelihood to you for a time. Say, O my Lord, judge thou in truth. O Lord, our Lord, most gracious is the one whose assistance should be sought against the blasphemies you utter. And so it ends on page 946. And the following chapter is chapter 22, and it's called The Pilgrimage, Al-Hajj. And chapter 21 is titled The Prophets, and the introduction reads, the last chapter, the prior chapter, dealt with the individual story of Moses and Aaron and contrasted it with the growth of evil in individuals like Pharaoh and the Samiri, and ended with a warning against evil and an exhortation to the purification of the soul with prayer and praise. This chapter begins with the external obstacles placed by evil against such purification and gives the assurance of God's power to defend men, illustrating this with reference to Abraham's fight against idolatry, Lot's fight against injustice and failure to proclaim Allah's glory by making full use of man's God-given faculties and powers, that of Job against impatience and want of self-confidence, that of Ishmael, Idris, Zulkifl against want of steady perseverance, that of Zunnun against hasty anger, that of Zechariah against isolation, and that of Mary against the lusts of this world. In each allusion there is a special point about the soul's purification. The common point is that the prophets were not, as the disbelievers suppose, just irresistible men. They had to win their ground inch by inch against all kinds of resistance from evil. The chronology of this chapter has no particular significance. It probably dates, well, so they say, but we know God, but they say it probably dates from the middle of the Meccan period of inspiration. So in summary, man treats as he has always treated the serious things of life with jest or contempt, but the judgment must come and truth must triumph. Unity of design and certainty of God's promises, God's protection and mercy and his justice. How Abraham triumphed over idols, as did others amongst God's chosen ones over various forms of evil. Work righteousness while it is yet time, for the judgment will come and only the righteous will inherit. So the introduction is found on page 915, and in Hebrew 915 is, it means a piece. So Amos 3:12, thus saith the Lord, as the shepherd taketh out of the mouth of the lion 2 legs or a piece of an ear, so shall the children of Israel be taken out that dwell in Samaria, in the corner of a bed, and in Damascus in a couch. So I'm going to read a few commentaries on this to just help those who need this. So it says here in the Benson commentary, as the shepherd taketh out of the mouth of the lion 2 legs, when a lion hath for some time ravaged the flock, but is at last frightened away by the noise of the shepherds and their dogs, or by the darts and other offensive weapons thrown at him, then all that in such a case the shepherd can hope to save will be but for some poor remains of the prey that the lion hath seized. And thus shall it be at the taking of Samaria, only a small render remnant of the inhabitants shall escape the search of their enemies, though they try to hide themselves in their most retired apartments, in the corner of a bed, in some dark corner behind a bed, and in Damascus, supposing some of them have fled thither. In a couch, some few of the poor may escape when the enemy finds them sick upon their couches, but the marginal reading on the bed's feet is thought by some to give a better sense, or as words rendered, Damascus also signifies a corner. And then in the Matthew Henry commentary, that power which is an instrument of unrighteousness will just be brought down and broken. What is got and kept wrongfully will not be kept long. Some are at ease, but there will come a day of visitation, and in that day all they are proud of and put confidence in shall fail them. God will inquire into the sins of which they have been guilty in their houses, the robbery they have stored up, and the luxury in which they lived. The pomp and pleasantness of men's houses do not fortify against God's judgments, but make sufferings and more grievous and vexatious. Yet a remnant, according to the election of grace, will be secured by our great and good shepherd, as from the jaws of destruction in the worst times. And in Greek, 9:15 means of uncertain derivation of foreigner, that is not Greek, barbarian. And then in Acts 28:2, and the barbarous people showed us no little kindness, for they kindled a fire and received us every one because of the present rain and because of the cold. And in Acts 28:4, and when the barbarians saw the venomous beast hang on his hand, they said among themselves, no doubt this man is a murderer, whom though he hath escaped the sea, yet vengeance suffereth not to live. And then in Romans 1:14, I am debtor both to the Greeks and to the barbarians, both to the wise and to the unwise. And in Corinthians 14:11, therefore, if I know not the meaning of the voice, I shall be unto him that speaketh a barbarian, and he that speaketh shall be a barbarian unto me. And in Colossians 3:11, where there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond nor free, but Christ is all and in all. Or, the sacrifices of our prophets and our Creator's message, single message through them all, is all and in all. And the chapter ended on page 946, and so 946 in Hebrew is Bunah, an Israelite, which means discretion. So in 1 Chronicles 2:25, and the sons of Jerahmeel, the firstborn of Hezron, were Ram, the firstborn, and Bunah, and Oren, and Ozem, and Ohijah. And so the name once again means understanding. And then the commentary for the verse says, genealogies, we are now come to the register of the children of Israel, that distinguished people who were to dwell alone and not be reckoned among the nations, but now in the traditions of their prophets and in their Creator, God, Allah, all are welcome to His salvation who come to Him. All have equal privileges according to their faith in Him, their love and devoutness to Him. All that is truly valuable consists in the favor, peace, and image of God, and a life spent to His glory, and promoting the welfare of our fellow creatures. And then in a following commentary on the same verse, they say here, Caleb Ephrata, which is a name in the verse, so called from uniting the names of the husband and the wife, and supposed to be the same as was afterwards called Bethlehem Ephrata. And then Ashur, the father of Tekoa, in 2 Samuel 14:2-4. He is called the father either from his being the first founder or perhaps the ruler of the city. So God will be elevating us to places of prominence, which no one can give us but Him, through a narrow pathway that no one else can see. And the Greek for 946 is a detestination, that is specifically idolatry, abomination. And so in Matthew 24:15, when you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. And then in Mark 13:14, but when you shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let him that readeth understand. Then let him that be in Judea flee to the mountains. And then in Luke 16:15, and he said unto them, You are they which justify yourselves before men, but God knoweth your hearts. For that which is highly esteemed among men is an abomination in the sight of God. And in Revelation 17:4, and the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And in Revelation 17:5, and upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, and an abomination of the earth. And in Revelation 21:27, and there shall in no wise enter into it anything that defileth neither, whosoever worketh abomination, or maketh a lie, but they which are written in the Lamb's book of life. And so no one can tell you that you're lying when they don't really know your journey and they don't have all the information. They're not God. I don't need to make myself clear to men of ignorance. And so God wants me to read the first two sections of the chapter. And so they begin on page 916. So let's take a look at that. 1 second. So 916 is something in pieces, that is bdellium, a fragrant, perhaps amber, others a pearl. So in Genesis 2:12, and the gold of that land is good. There is bdellium and the oxen stone. And in Numbers 11:7, and the manna was as coriander seed, and the color thereof as the color of bdellium. And in Greek, 9:16 is to weigh down, burden, charge, heavy pressed. Be heavy, be pressed, be burdened. And then in Matthew 26:43, and he came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. And then in Mark 14:40, and when he returned, he found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy, neither wist they what to answer him. And then in Luke 9:32, but Peter and they that were with him were heavy with sleep, and when they were awake, they saw his glory, and the two men that stood with him. And so 2 Corinthians 1:8, for we would not, brethren, have you ignorant of our trouble which came to us in Asia, that we were pressed out of measure, above strength, insomuch that we despaired even of life. And in 2 Corinthians 5:4, for we that are in this tabernacle do groan, being burdened, not for that we would be unclothed, but clothed upon, that mortality might be swallowed up of life. In 1 Timothy 5:16, if any man or woman that believeth have widows, let them relieve them, and let not the church be charged, that it may relieve them that are widows indeed. And so it reads, so in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, closer and closer to mankind comes their reckoning, yet they heed not, and they turn away. Never comes aught to them of a renewed message from their Lord, but they listen to it as in jest, their hearts toying as with trifles. The wrongdoers conceal their private counsels, saying, Is this one more than a man like yourselves? Will you go to witchcraft with your eyes open? Say, My Lord knoweth every word spoken in the heavens and on earth. He is the one that heareth and knoweth all things. Nay, they say, these are medleys of dreams. Nay, he forged it. Nay, he is but a poet. Let him then bring us a sign like the ones that were sent to the prophets of old. As to those before them, not one of the towns which we destroyed believed. Will these then believe? Before thee also the messengers we sent were but men, to whom we granted inspiration. If you know this not, ask of those who possess the message. Nor did we give them bodies that ate no food, nor were they immortals. Then we fulfilled to them our promise, and we saved them, and those whom we willed, but we destroyed. Those who transgressed beyond bounds, we have revealed for you, O men, a book which will give you eminence. Will you not then understand? How many were the towns we utterly destroyed because of their iniquities, setting up in their places other people? Yet when they felt our punishment coming, behold, they tried to flee from it. Flee not, but return to the good things of this life, which were given you to your homes, in order that you may be called to account. They say, Ah, woe to us, we were indeed wrongdoers, and that cry of theirs ceased not, till we made them as a field that is mown, as ashes, silent and quenched. Not for idle sport did we create the heavens and the earth and all that is between. If it had been our wish to take just a pastime, we should surely have taken it from things nearest to us. If we would do such a thing, nay, we hurled the truth against falsehood, and it knocked out its brain. And behold, falsehood doth perish. Ah, woe be to you for the false things you ascribe to us. To him belong all creatures in the heavens and on earth, even those who are with him are not too proud to serve him, nor are they ever weary of his service. They celebrate his praises night and day, nor do they ever flag or intermit. Or have they taken for worship gods from the earth who can raise the dead? Who can raise the dead? Gods, lowercase g, from this earth. If there were in the heavens and the earth other lowercase g gods besides the God, Allah, there would have been ruin in both. Glory to Allah, the Lord of the throne. High is he above what they attribute to him. He cannot be questioned for his acts, but they will be questioned for theirs. Or have they taken for worship other gods besides him? Say, bring your convincing proof. This is the message of those with me and the message of those before me. But most of them know not the truth, and so they turn away. Not a messenger did we send before these without this inspiration sent by us to him, that there is no God but I, the God, Allah. Therefore worship and serve me, the God Allah. And they say, the Most Gracious has taken a son. Glory to him. They are but servants raised to honor. They speak not before he speaks, and they act in all things by his command. He knows what is before them and what is behind them, and they offer no intercession except for those with whom he is well pleased. And they stand in awe and reverence of his glory. If any of them should say, I am a god, lowercase g, besides him, such a one we would reward with hell. Thus do we reward those who do wrong. And so the footnotes will read, every minute sees them near to their doom, and yet they are sadly heedless and even actively turn away from the message that would save them. In each age, when the message of God is renewed, the very people who should have known better and welcomed the renewal and the sweeping away of human cobwebs either receive it with amused self-superiority, which later turns to active hostility, or with careless indifference. God's message is free and open, and the full light of day. His enemies plot against it in secrecy, lest their own false motives be exposed. Their jealousy prevents them from accepting a man like themselves as a teacher or a warner or a guide. Literally, in a state in which you actually see that is witchcraft. When God's messenger is proved to be above them in moral worth and in true insight and in earnestness and power of eloquence, they accuse him of witchcraft, a word which may mean nothing or perhaps some mysterious deceitful arts. Notice that in the usual Arabic text, that is, according to the Qur'at of Hafs, the word kala is here, and also in chapter 21 verse 112 below, as well as in chapter 23 verse 112, spelt differently from the usual spelling of the word in other places. Kul is the reading of the Basra Qira'at, meaning say thou in the imperative. If we construe, he says, the pronoun refers to this one in the preceding verse, the prophet, but more than one commentator understands the meaning in the imperative, and I agree with them. The point is merely one of verbal construction. The meaning is the same in either case. And so this is for say what your Lord has spoken to you to say. And the footnotes continue, every word, whether whispered in secret or spoken openly, is known to our Creator, Allah. Let not the wrongdoers imagine that their secret plots are secret to the knower of all things. The charges against God's inspired messengers are heaped up magic, says one. That means we don't understand it, says another. Oh, but we know he is a mere dreamer of confused dreams. If the dreams fit in with real things and vital experiences, another will suggest, oh yes, why dragon supernatural agencies, he is clever enough to forge it himself. Or another suggests he is a poet. Poets can invent things and say them in beautiful words. Another interposes, what we should like to see is miracles, like those we read of in stories of the prophets of old. So if such miracles as you read of failed to convince unbelievers of old, what chance is there that these unbelievers will believe? Miracles may come, but they are no cures for unbelief. So this answers the unbeliever's taunt. He is just a man like ourselves. True, but all messengers sent by God were men, not angels or other kinds of beings, who could not understand men or whom men could not understand. As men, they were subject to all the laws governing the physical bodies of men. They ate and drank, and their bodies perished in death. But however difficult or impossible their mission may have appeared to them or to the world at first, they won through eventuality. Even those who seem to have been defeated, examples are given in the later part of this chapter, especially in verses 51 to 93. They were delivered from the wrath which overtook the unbelievers, as were those with them who accepted God's message and placed themselves in conformity with his will and plan. That is the meaning of whom we willed. When they had every chance of repentance and reform, they rejected God's message, and perhaps even put up an open defiance. When they actually began to feel the wrath coming, they began to flee. But it was too late. Besides, where could they flee to from the wrath of God? Hence the ironical appeal to them in the next verse. Better go back to your luxuries and what you thought were your permanent homes. Christ says in the present Gospel of St. Matthew, in chapter 3, verse 7, O generation of vipers, who hath warned you to flee from the wrath to come? See the last note in reference to, be called to account. You thought your home so comfortable. Why don't you go back to them? You will be called to account. Perhaps there may be rewards to be given you. Who knows? This irony is itself the beginning of the punishment. But the ungodly now see how wrong they had been. But their signs and regrets now avail them nothing. It is too late. They are lost, and nothing can save them. The two similes present two different aspects of the lamentations of the ungodly. When they really see the wrath to come, there is a stampede. But where can they go? Their lamentation is now the only mark of their life, and we already see evidence of this and what's happening in our lives right now, and we're going to see this extend into the future. But with those who oppose us and oppose God's message. But it dies away, but they die away as corn vanishes from a field that is being mown, or as a dying fire is slowly extinguished. They do not die, they wish they were dead. So the Hindu doctrine of Leela, that all things were created for sport, is here negatived, but more with Allah. We must not associate any ideas but those of truth, righteousness, mercy, justice, and the other attributes implied in his beautiful names. He does not jest nor play with his creatures. If such an idea as that of play or pastime had been possible with regard to God, and if he had wished really to indulge in pastime, he would have done it with creatures of light nearest to him, not with the lowly material creation that we see around us, such as that, 1, God, they should not say these following things: that God has partners, 2, that he has begotten a son, and 3, that he has daughters, or any other superstitions derogatory to the dignity and glory of God. The pure angelic hosts, whom we imagine to be glorious creatures of light high in heaven, near the throne of God himself, and yet his creatures, and are yet his creatures, and serve him without ceasing, and are proud to do so. Such is the majesty of God Most High. The different kinds of false gods whom people raise from their imagination are now referred to in verses 21 to 23. The references to the gods, the lowercase g gods of this earth, whether idols or local godlings or deified heroes or animals or trees or forces of nature around us, which men have for time to time worshipped, these as deities, having no life except what their worshippers give them. The answer, of course, is no. No one but God can raise the dead to life. The miracle is in the story of Jesus was by God's leave that Jesus was able to perform these miracles. And Jesus said that we are going to perform greater miracles than him. Peace be upon all the prophets I mentioned, and I'm going to continue to name. So it was a miracle of God, not one of Jesus by his own power or will. So after the false gods of the earth, in verse 21, are mentioned, the false gods in the heavens and the earth, like those in the Greek pantheon in verse 22, who quarreled and fought and slandered each other and made their Olympus a perfect bare garden. But God is self-subsisting, our God, Allah. All his creatures are responsible to him and dependent upon him. There is no other being to whom he can be responsible or on whom he can be dependent. Where two kinds of false worship are noted, now we are warned against the third danger, the worship of false gods of any sort. Pagan man is prolific of creating abstract images for worship, including the self or abstract intelligence or power. In verse 26 below is mentioned a fourth kind of false worship, which imagines that God begets sons or daughters. Thus, this verse should be read with the next. All reason revolts against the idea of conflicting lowercase g gods and points to unity in creation and unity in the Godhead. This is not only the message of Islam, those with me, but the message of all prophets who came before the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, those before me. And the line of the prophets was closed with him. And the message given to every prophet in all ages was that of unity as the fundamental basis of order and design in the world, material, moral, and spiritual. So these prophets, their message encloses us. So this refers both to the Trinitarian superstition that God has begotten a son, and to the Arab superstition that the angels were daughters of God. All such superstitions are derogatory to the glory of God, Allah. The prophets and the angels are no more than servants of God. They are raised high in honor, and therefore they deserve our highest respect, but not our worship. They never say anything before they receive God's command to say it, and their acts are similarly conditioned. This is also the teaching of Jesus as reported in the Gospel of St. John in chapter 12, verses 49 to 50. For I have not spoken of myself, but the Father which sent me. He gave me a command, what I should say, what I should speak, and I know that his commandment is life everlasting. Whatsoever I speak therefore, even as the Father said unto me, so I speak. If rightly understood, Father has the same meaning as our Rabb, our God, our sustainer and cherisher, not a begetter or progenitor. Those who have conformed to the will of Allah, of God, obey his laws, thus winning the stamp of his approval. They, the usual interpretation refers the pronoun to the servants of God who intercede. It may also refer to those on whose behalf intercession is made. They do not take it as a matter of course, but stand in due awe and reverence of God's great glory and mercy. The evolution of the ordered worlds as we see them is hinted at as man's intellectual gaze over the physical world expands. He sees more and more how unity is the dominating note in God's wonderful universe. Taking the solar system alone, we know that the maximum intensity of sunspots corresponds with the maximum intensity of magnetic storms on this earth. The universal law of gravitation seems to bind all masses together. Seems to. Right? Because these are seeming forces, and God can teach us these forces through teaching us the knowledge of higher forces. And he can make this knowledge seem so simple that you can teach it to someone that you could have imagined would never have been able to become coherent or excellent in this kind of, in any subject. You can make them an expert with the wisdom and knowledge that God gives you. And so, the universal law of gravitation seems to bind all mass together. Physical facts point to the throwing off of planets from vast quantities of diffuse nebular matter, of which the central condensed core is the sun. So about 72% of the surface of our globe is still covered with water, and it has been estimated that if the inequalities on the surface were all leveled, the whole surface would be underwater, as the mean elevation of land sphere level would be 7,000 to 10,000 feet below the surface of the ocean. This shows the predominance of water on our globe, that all life began in the water, is also a conclusion to which our latest knowledge in biological science points, apart from the fact that protoplasm, the original basis of living matter, is liquid or semi-liquid and in a state of constant flux and instability. There is the fact that land animals, like the higher vertebrates, including man, show in their embryological history organs like those of fish, indicating the watery origin of their original habitation. The constitution of protoplasm is about 80 to 85% water. So lest it should shake with them, here them refers back to they at the end of the preceding verse, meaning unbelievers. It might be mankind in general, but the pointed address to those who do not realize and understand God's mercies is appropriate to drive home to them the fact that it is God's well-ordered providence that protects them normally from cataclysms like earthquakes, but that they could, for their iniquities, be destroyed in an instant, as the Ad and the Thamud were destroyed before them. As pointed out above, if the surface of the earth were leveled up, it would all be underwater, and therefore the firm mountains are a further source of security of life which has evolved in terrestrial forms. Though the mountains may seem impassable barriers, yet God's providence has provided broad passes between them to afford highways for human communications. And so in both the literal and the figurative sense, literally these natural mountains, highways, direct men in the way they should go. Figuratively, these wonderful instances of God's providence should turn men's thoughts to the true guidance of God in life. So canopy well guarded. The heavens form a canopy that is secure from falling down. They also form a sublime spectacle and a mystery that man can only faintly reach. So I have indicated, unlike most translators, the metaphor of swimming implied in the original words, how beautiful it is to contemplate the heavenly bodies swimming through space or either in their rounded courses before our gaze. Life on this planet without death has not been granted to any man. The taunt of the unbelievers at the holy prophet, peace be upon him, was therefore futile. Could any of them live without death at some time or other? Could they name anyone who did? And so the soul does not die, but when it separates from the body at the death of the body, the soul gets a taste of death. In our life of probation on this earth, our virtue and faith are tested by many things. Some are tested by calamities, and some by the good things of this life. If we prove our true mettle, we pass our probation with success. In any case, we all must return to God, and then will our life be praised at its true value. To the godly man, the issue between false worship and true worship is a very serious matter. To the skeptics and unbelievers, it is only a joke. They take it lightly and laugh at the godly man. They not only laugh at him, but they blaspheme when the name of the one true God is mentioned. The reply to this is in the next verse. Haste is in the very bone and marrow of man. If he is granted respite for his own sake, in order that he may have a further chance of repentance and coming back to God, he says impatiently and incredulously, "Bring on the punishment quickly, that I may see if what you say is true." Alas, it is true. When the punishment actually comes near, and he sees it, he will not want it hastened. He will want more time and further delay. Poor creature of haste! They would not be so irresponsible if they only realized the terrible future for them. The fire will envelop them on all sides, and no help will then be possible. Is it not best for them now to turn and repent? The punishment may come too suddenly, as is said in the next verse. The same verse occurs again in chapter 6, verse 10. So where it says, what they are mocking at now will be in a position to mock them in due time. Okay? So be patient and rest in the Lord. for his promises draw near. God is most gracious. God is most gracious. If in spite of his great mercy you are so rebellious and depraved as to incur his wrath, who is there that can save you? Who can save you? His wrath can descend on you at any time, by night or by day. And then it follows up with the following note, Ashaba. To join as companions with an or min, it has also the meaning with an ayin or mean. It has also the meaning of to defend or remove from someone. Once I get out of here, I'm going to take Arabic lessons so that I can improve my Arabic. So to continue, the full significance can only be got by a long paraphrase. They are not fit to be mentioned in the same breath with us, nor can they be defended from us. So, Umr, age, generation, period, time, life, here, period, is most appropriate as it covers many generations, these men and their fathers. I mean, I could study Arabic now, but God really wants me to really focus on other things, and so eventually I will devote a lot of time and respect to Arabic, whether it be just devoting time to myself in this endeavor, or through the assistance of just someone who's a knowledgeable orator, and so that I can perfect that as well. And so to continue with the footnotes, the particular signification is that Islam spread from the outer borders, social and geographical, gradually inwards. The social fringe was the humbler people, such as slaves and poor men. The geographical reference is to Medina and tribes away from the Meccan center. The proud and unbelieving Quraysh were the last to come in when the circle was gradually drawing tighter and tighter around them. The general signification applies to them all at all times. God's truth makes its way first among the poor and the lowly, those whose minds are unsoiled by prejudices of false pride or false knowledge, but it gradually hems in the obstinate until it prevails in the end. According to the English saying, none is so deaf as those who will not hear. When they deliberately shut their ears to warnings from the merciful God, Allah, meant for their own good, the responsibility is their own. But their cowardice is shown in the next verse by their behavior when the first breath of the wrath reaches them. Not the smallest action, word, thought, motive, or predilection, but must come into the account of God. And then they put here in Browning, in Rabbi Ben Ezra, but all the world's course, thumb and finger, failed to plumb, so past in making up the main account, all instincts immature, all purpose unsure, that weighed not as his work, yet swelled the man's account, thoughts hardly to be packed into a narrow act, fancies that broke through language and escaped, all I could never be, all men ignored me, this I was worth to God whose wheel the pitcher shaped. And so, the following note, the literalism of Sale has here excelled itself, he translates, and there will be sufficient account with us. What is meant is that when God takes account, his account will be perfected. There will be no flaw in it, and there may be in earthly accounts who require other people's help in some matters of account which they do not understand for want of knowledge of that particular department they are dealing with. God's knowledge is perfect, and therefore his justice will be perfect also, for he will not fail to take into account all the most intangible things that determine conduct and character. There is no contradiction between this and chapter 18, verses 104 to 105, where it is said that men of vain works, shallow hypocritical deeds, will have no weight attached to their deeds. In fact, the two correspond. And the following note, where the meaning of Furqan is discussed, here three things are mentioned as given to Moses and Aaron. 1. The criterion for judgment. This might well be the wonderful proofs they saw of God's goodness and glory, from which they could have no doubt as to God's will and command. 2. The light, which was the inner enlightenment of their soul, such as comes from inspiration, and 3, the message, the book, the original book of Moses, which Aaron, as his lieutenant, would also use as a guide for his people. So note the 3 kinds of fear mentioned in verses 48 to 49. Taqwa is the fear of running counter to the will of God. It is akin to the love of Him. For we fear to offend those we love. It results in right conduct, and those who entertain it are those who would do right. Then there is khashyat, the fear of Allah, lest the person who entertains it may be found in his inmost thoughts to be sort of the standard which God wishes for him. This is also righteous, but in a less high degree than taqwa, which is akin to love. And thirdly, there is the fear of consequences on the day of judgment. So ishfaq, this also may lead to righteousness, but is also a still lower plane. Perhaps the 3 correspond to the criterion, the light and the message, or warning of the last verse. So here is a prophet and a book greater than Moses and his book. We will just, with grace, we're going to say that it later revelation, it expands the revelation which came before, and that's what they're implying. And so it just builds upon, it increases and expands, it deepens. So are you going to reject him and it? Peace be upon him. So rushed right conduct corresponding in action to the quality expressed in the epithet Hanif, sound or true in faith, applied to Abraham in chapter 2, verse 135 of the Quran and elsewhere. Hence Abraham's title, the friend of Allah, the Khalil of Allah, in chapter 4, verse 125. Reference is made to Abraham in many places. In chapter 19, verses 42 to 49. It was with reference to his revelations to his father. The problem was how a righteous man should deal with his father when his duty to his father conflicts with his duty to God. Here the problem is how a righteous man should deal with evil and overcome it, how he should fight against evil, and if he is subject to the fire of persecution, how his firmness draws God's mercy, and the very troubles he is placed in becomes his comfort and joy. Abraham looked at life with a serious eye, and his people took it lightheartedly. He was devoted to truth, and they cared more for ancestral custom. In the conflict he seemed to be in their power, but he was fearless, and he triumphed by God's grace. For the various words for creation, they say, see another note. And then in chapter 2, verse 117, where fatara is explained and differentiated from other words of similar meaning. He wants to convince them of the powerlessness of their idols, but he does not do it underhand. He tells them that he is going to do something when once they are gone and their backs are turned to the idols, as much as to say that the idols are dependent on their care and attention. Apparently the people are amused and want to see what he does, so they leave him to his own devices. They leave Abraham, peace be upon him. So he was enacting a scene to make the people ashamed of worshipping senseless stocks and stones. He left the biggest idol untouched and broke the others to pieces, as if a fight had taken place between the idols, and the biggest had smashed the others. Would they turn to the surviving idol and ask him how it all happened? Different groups of people are speaking. Those who were not present at Abraham's speech in verse 57 ask, "Who has done this?" Those who were at once named him, whereupon a formal council of the people was held, and Abraham was arranged. They asked him the formal question. There was no mystery about it. He had already openly threatened to do something to the idols, and people who had heard his threats were there. He now continues his ironic taunts to the idol worshippers. You ask me, why don't you ask the idols? Doesn't it look as if this big fellow has smashed the smaller ones in a quarrel? If they do not ask the idols, they confess that the idols have not intelligence enough to answer. This argument is developed in verses 64 to 67. Note that while the false worshippers laughed at his earnestness, he plays them out by a grim practical joke, which at the same time advances the cause of truth. Abraham's biting irony cut them to the quick. What could they say? They turned to each other. Some among them thought he had the best of the argument. They were not keen on idolatry, and they told their fellows that it was useless arguing with Abraham. They all hung their heads in shame, but presently they thought they would face out Abraham and take his words literally. They said, "You know quite well that idols do not speak." This was precisely what Abraham wanted them to say, and he delivered his final blow. Literally, they were turned down on their heads, which may suggest a metaphorical somersault. They recovered from their dawning shame for idolatry and were prepared to argue it out with the youth Abraham. But I think there is better authority for the interpretation I have adopted. As soon as they admitted in so many words that the idols could not speak, Abraham delivered his final attack. Then why do you worship useless, impotent creatures? After that there remains nothing but the argument of violence, which they proceeded to exercise, being the party in power. Burn him at the stake is an easy cry, but it was not Abraham that suffered, it was his persecutors. The nature of fire by all physical laws of matter is to be hot. The fire became cool and a means of safety for Abraham. Can we form any idea of the place where he passed through the furnace and the stage in his career at which this happened? He was born in Ur of Chaldees, a place on the lower reaches of the Euphrates, not 100 miles from the Persian Gulf. This was the cradle, or one of the cradles, of human civilization. Astronomy was studied here in the very ancient times, and the worship of the sun and the moon and the stars was the prevailing form of religion. Abraham revolted against this quite early in life, and his argument is referred to in chapter 6, verses 74 to 82. They also had idols in their temples, probably idols representing heavenly bodies and celestial winged creatures. He was still a youth when he broke their idols. This was stage number 2. After this, he was marked down as a rebel and persecuted. Perhaps some years passed before the incident of his being thrown into the fire. In chapter 20, in this chapter, in verses 68 to 69, took place. Traditionally, the fire incident is referred to as a king, a king called Nimrod, about whom if Nimrod's capital was in Assyria near Nineveh, the site near modern Mosul, we may suppose either that the king's rule extended over the whole of Mesopotamia, or that Abraham wandered north through Babylonia to Assyria. Various stratagems were devised to get rid of him, but he was saved by the mercy of God. The final break came when he was probably a man of mature age and could speak to his father with some authority. This incident is referred to in chapter 19, verses 41 to 48. He now left his ancestral lands and, avoiding the Syrian desert, came to the fertile lands of Aram, or Syria, and so south of Canaan, when the incident of chapter 11, verses 69 to 76 took place. It is some years after this that we may suppose he built the Kaaba with Ishmael, in chapter 2, verses 124 to 29, and his prayer in chapter 14, verses 35 to 41, may be referred to at the same time. His visit to Egypt in Genesis 11 or 12:10 is not referred to in the Quran, as they could not get rid of him by open punishment. They tried secret plans, but were foiled throughout. It was not he that lost, but they. On the contrary, he left them and prospered and became the progenitor of great peoples. The land of Aram, or Syria, which is in its widest connotation includes Canaan or Palestine. Syria is a well-watered, fertile land with a Mediterranean sea coast on which the famous commercial cities of Tyre and Sidon were situated. Its population is very mixed, and it has been a bone of contention between all the great kingdoms and empires of Western Asia and Egypt, and European interest in its dates from the most ancient times. So Nephilet has many meanings. 1, bounty. 2, extra work or prayer. 3, extra or additional gifts. 4, grandson. The two last significations are implied here. Not only was Abraham given a son in his old age, he was given not only Isaac but several sons, the chief being Ishmael and Isaac, who both joined in burying him in Genesis 25:9, and he also saw grandsons. Ishmael is especially mentioned later in verse 85, apart from Isaac's line, on account of his special importance for Islam. The spiritual lessons from this passage may be recapitulated. The righteous man makes no compromise with evil. If the votaries of evil laugh at him, he pays them in their own coin, but he stands firm by his principles. His firmness causes some confusion among the followers of evil, and he openly declares the faith that is in him. They try openly and secretly to injure or kill him, but God protects him, while the evil perishes from its own excesses. So Lot's people were given to unspeakable abominations. His mission was to preach to them. He withstood evil, but they rejected him, so they were punished, but he and his followers were saved. So the date of Noah was many centuries before that of Abraham. The contemporaries of Noah were given to unbelief, oppression of the poor, and vain disputations. He carried God's message to them, and standing fast in faith, built the ark, in which he was saved with his followers from the flood, while the wicked were drowned. The sheep, on account of the negligence of the shepherd, got into a cultivated field or vineyard by night and ate up the young plants or their tender shoots, causing damage to the extent of perhaps a whole year's crop. In the following footnote. So David was king, and in his seat of judgment he considered the matter so serious that he awarded the owner of the field the sheep themselves in compensation for the damage. The Roman law of the 12 tables might have approved of this decision, and on the same principle was built up the deodand doctrine of English law, now obsolete. His son Solomon, a mere boy of 11, thought of a better decision, where the penalty would better fit the offense. The loss was the loss of the fruits or produce of the field of the vineyard. The corpus of the property was not lost. Solomon's suggestion was that the owner of the field or vineyard should not take the sheep altogether, but only detain them long enough to recoup his actual damage from the milk, wool, and possibly young of the sheep, and then return the sheep to the shepherd. David's merit was that he accepted the suggestion, even though it came from a little boy. Solomon's merit was that he distinguished between corpus and income, and though a boy, was not ashamed to put his case before his father. But in either case, it was God who inspired the true realization of justice. He was presented and witnessed the fair, and he is present all the time. Whatever is in the heavens and the earth celebrates the praises of Allah. So even the thunder repeateth his praises, and they list several verses. All nature ever sings the praises of Allah. David sang in his Psalms, "Praise the Lord from the earth, you mountains and all hills, creeping things and flying fowl. All nature sings to Allah's glory in unison with David and angels and men of God." The making of coats of males is attributed to David. So it is defensive armor, and therefore its discovery and supply is associated with deeds of righteousness. In chapter 34, verses 10 to 11, in contrast with the deadly weapons which man invents for offensive purposes. Indeed, all fighting, unless in defense of righteousness, is mere violence. So David's good work then was, 1, he was open to learn wisdom wherever it came from. 2, he sang the praises of God in unison with all nature. And 3, he made defensive armor. But all these things he did because of the faculties which God had given him, and we must be grateful for this, for all things to God. So in the following footnote, this has been interpreted to mean that Solomon had miraculous power over the winds, and he could make them obey his order. In any case, the power behind was and is from God, who has granted man intelligence and the faculties by which he can tame the more unruly forces of nature. So, evidently, Palestine, in which was Solomon's capital, though his influence extended far north in Syria. So it was God's power ultimately who granted him wisdom. Solomon tamed the jinn with wisdom. Ayub was a prosperous man with faith in God, living somewhere in the northeast quarter of Arabia. He suffers from a number of calamities. His cattle are destroyed, his servants slain by the sword, and his family crushed under his roof. But he holds fast to his faith in God. As a further calamity, he is covered with loathsome sores from head to foot. He loses his peace of mind, and he curses the day he was born. His false friends come and attribute his afflictions to sin. These Job's comforters are no comforters at all, and he further loses his balance of mind. But God recalls to him all his mercies, and he resumes his humility and gives up self-justification. He is restored to prosperity with twice as much as he had before. His brethren and friends come back to him. He had a new family of 7 sons and 3 fair daughters. He lived to a good old age and saw 4 generations of descendants. All this is recorded in the book of Job in the Old Testament. Of all the Hebrew writings, the Hebrew of this book comes nearest to Arabic. The account given in the biblical sources and the image that it projects of Prophet Job is decidedly different from that found in the Quran and the Hadith, which present him as a prophet and brilliant example of dignified patience, becoming of a great prophet of God, ever trustful in him and his promises. Nothing could be farther from truth than saying that he lost his peace of mind or resorted to curses during this period of trial. Job is the pattern of humility, patience, and faith in God. It was with these weapons that he fought and conquered evil. So Ishmael is mentioned especially apart from the line which descended through Isaac, as he was the founder of a separate Ummah, and his sufferings began in infancy. But his steady constancy and submission to the will of God were especially shown where he earned the title of sacrifice to God as well. So they say, see chapter 19, verse 54. That was the particular quality of his constancy and patience. For Idris, they say chapter 19:56, he was in a high station in life, but that did not spoil him. He was sincere and true, and that was the particular quality of his constancy and patience. Dhul-Kifl would literally mean possessor of or giving a double requital or portion, or else one who used a cloak of double thickness, that being one of the meanings of kifl. The commentators differ in opinion as to who is meant, why the title is applied to him, and the point of his being grouped with Ishmael and Idris for constancy and patience. I think the best suggestion is that afforded by Karsten Niebuhr in his Reisebecker, I don't know. So it's just in his book, as quoted in the Encyclopedia of Islam under Dhul-Kifl, he visited Mashhad Ali in Iraq and also the little town called Kefil, midway between Najaf and Hilla in Babylon. Kefil, he says, is the Arabic form of Ezekiel. The shrine of Ezekiel was there, and the Jews came to it on pilgrimage. If we accept Dhul-Kifl to be not an epithet, but an Arabicized form of Ezekiel, it fits the context that Ezekiel was a prophet in Israel who was carried away to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar after his second attack on Jerusalem, and his book is included in the English Bible, the Old Testament. He was chained and bound and put into prison, and for a time he was dumb. In Ezekiel 3:25-26, he bore all with patience and constancy and continued to reprove boldly the evils in Israel. In a burning passage, he denounces false leaders and words which are eternally true. Woe be to the shepherds of Israel that do feed themselves. Should not the shepherds feed the flock? You eat the fat and you clothe and you with the wool. You kill them that are fed, but you feed not the flock. The diseased have you not strengthened, neither have you healed that which was sick, neither have you bound up that which was broken. And in Ezekiel 34:2-4. So Ezekiel is again mentioned in the Quran in chapter 38, verse 48, along with Ishmael and Elisha. So Zunnun, the man of the fish or the whale, is the title of Jonah. because he was swallowed by a large fish or whale. He was the prophet raised to war in the Assyrian capital Nineveh. For Nineveh, see chapter 10, verse 98. His story is told again in chapter 37, verses 139 to 149. When his first warning was unheeded by the people, he denounced God's wrath on them, but they repented and God forgave them for the time being. Jonah, meanwhile, departed in wrath, discouraged at the apparent failure of his mission. He should have remained in the most discouraging circumstances and relied on the power of God, for God hath power over Nineveh and over the messenger he had sent to Nineveh. He went away to the sea and took a ship, but apparently the sailors threw him out as a man of bad omen in a storm. He was swallowed by a big fish or whale, but in the depth of the darkness he cried to God and confessed his weakness. The darkness may be interpreted both physically and spiritually. Physically as the darkness of the night and the storm, and the fish's body spiritually as the darkness in his soul, his extreme distress in the situation which he had brought on himself. God most gracious forgave him. He was cast out ashore. He was given the shelter of a plant in his state of mental and physical lassitude. He was refreshed and strengthened, and the work of his mission prospered. Thus he overcame all his disappointment by repentance and faith, and God accepted him. So Zechariah was a priest. Both he and his wife were devout and punctilious in their duties. They were old, and they had no son. He was troubled in mind, not so much by the vulgar desire to have a son to carry on his line, but because he felt that his people were not unselfishly devout, and there would be no sincere work for God unless he could train up someone himself. He was given a son, John the Baptist, who added to the devout reputation of the family, for he is called noble, chaste, and a prophet. In chapter 3, verse 39, all three, father, mother, and son, were made worthy of each other, and they repelled evil by their devout emulation and virtue. So it is not that I crave a personal heir to myself. All things go back to thee, and thou art the best inheritors. But I see no one around me sincere enough to carry on my work for thee. Wilt thou give me one whom I can train? So aslaha means to improve, to mend, to reform, to make better, here with reference to Zechariah's wife. The signification is twofold. One, that her barrenness would be removed so that she could become a mother. Two, that her spiritual dignity should be raised in becoming the mother of John the Baptist, and by implication his also in becoming the father of John. So Mary the mother of, and in the following note, Mary the mother of Jesus. Chastity was her special virtue. With a son of virgin birth, she and Jesus became a miracle to all the nations. That was the virtue with which both Mary and Jesus resisted evil. So then the following note, family, ummah, this is best translated by brotherhood here. Community, race, nation, people are words which import other ideas and do not quite correspond to ummah in the fullness of its capacity. Religion and way of life are derived meanings which could be used in other passages, but are less appropriate here. Our attention has been drawn to people of very different temperaments and virtues, widely differentiated in time, race, language, surroundings, history, and work to be performed, but forming the closest brotherhood as being men and women united in the highest service of God. They prefigure the final and perfected brotherhood of Islam. So God's message was and ever is one, and his messengers treated it as one. It is people of narrower views who come later and trade on the earlier names that break up the message and the brotherhood into jarring camps and sects. God gives credit for every act of righteousness, however small, when combined with sincere faith in God. It becomes the stepping stone to higher and higher things. It is never lost. But when wickedness comes to such a pass that the wrath of God descends as it did on Sodom, the case becomes hopeless. The righteous were warned and delivered before the wrath had descended. But those who destroyed will not get another chance, as they flouted all previous chances. They will only be raised at the approach of the day of judgment. For Gog and Magog, they say, see chapter 18 verse 92, the name stands for wild and lawless tribes who will break their barriers and swarm through the earth. This will be one of the prognostications of the approaching judgment. So the ultimate proof of truth and falsehood will be that truth will endure and come to its own, while falsehood will be destroyed. And so the men who worship truth will come to their own, while those who worship falsehood will be in a fire of punishment they could scarcely have imagined before. In that state there will be nothing but regrets and sighs and groans, and these evil sounds will drown everything else. In contrast to the misery of those who reject truth and right will be the happiness of those who accepted it. The good will not hear the least sound of the groans of evil. Their true soul's desire will be fulfilled not temporarily as in this world, but in a permanent form. So the judgment and balancing of accounts will be a mighty terror to the evildoers, but it will cause to the righteous not grief or anxiety, but hope and happiness. For now they will be in a congenial atmosphere and will see the fulfillment of their ideals in this meeting and greeting of the angels, preparatory to their enjoyment of the supreme bliss, seeing the face of God. The word, the universe as we know it, will be folded up like a scroll of parchment, for it will have done its work. If God created all this world out of nothing, he can create an entirely new heaven and a new earth on a plane of which we can form no conception in our present life, and he will do so, for that is his promise. And so that is his promise for those who have ears. So Zabur, the book of Psalms of David. The name of David is expressly mentioned in connection with the Psalms in chapter 4, verse 163, and in chapter 1755. Although there the indefinite articles apply to the word as meaning a book of scripture, see Psalms 25:13. His seed shall inherit the earth. And then in 37:11, the meek shall inherit the earth, quoted by Jesus in Matthew 5:3, and in 37:29 in the Quran, the righteous shall inherit the land. The same promise occurs in the Pentateuch in Exodus 32:13. The culmination of God's revelation is in the Quran, which confirms previous scriptures, corrects the errors which men introduced into them, and explains many points in detail for all who seek for right worship and service to God, whether they inherit the previous books, the people of the book or not. It is a universal message. So once again, I'm going to read that sentence. The culmination of God's revelation is in the Quran, which confirms previous scriptures, corrects the errors which men introduced into them, and explains many points in detail for all who seek for right worship and service to God, whether they inherit the previous books and the people of the book or not. It is a universal message. There is no question now of race or nation, of a chosen people, or the seed of Abraham, or the seed of David, or of Hindu Aryavarta, or Jew or Gentile, Arab or Ajam, non-Arab, Turk or Tajik, European or Asiatic, white or colored, Aryan, Semitic, Mongolian or African, or American, Australian, or Polynesian, to all men and creatures other than men who have any spiritual responsibility, the principles universally apply. Not my God only, but also your God, for there is but one God, the universal Lord, who made and loves and cherishes all. So if you do not realize the significance of the message, I at least have done my duty. I have given the good news for the righteous and the warning for the unjust, without favor or partiality, and without abating one jot of the truth, openly and squarely, for all do not ask me when the good news and the warning will be fulfilled. That is for God to decide, not for me or for you to know. And so the messenger of God freely and impartially teaches all how to carry out God's will and live a good life. If some of them are hypocrites and come into the brotherhood from baser motives and not from not the pure motives of the love of God. Their motives and conduct will be judged by God and not by men. In the same way, if men who come into the brotherhood from pure motives and yet feel aggrieved that those outside are better off from a worldly point of view, they are wrong. It may be that the fleeting enjoyment of this world's goods is but a trial, and they should be grateful for being saved from temptation. And so, in the following note, the better reading is to say, in the imperative rather, that he, the prophet, said or says in the indicative mood, that in the construction there are three distinct things which the prophet is asked to say. And first, the statement in verses 109 to 11, addressed to those who turn away from the message. 2, the prayer addressed to God in the first part of verse 112. And 3, the advice given directly to the believers in the second part of verse 112. I have marked these divisions by means of inverted commas, that is, God's judgment as between the teacher and those who refuse his message, or between the righteous and those who taunt them for their poverty will be the true one, and both the teacher and the brotherhood may leave the judgment to God. Blasphemy is a dreadful sin. We must guard ourselves from it. But as regards others, if we cannot prevent it, we must pray to God for assistance and not rely upon carnal weapons. So if I look up chapter 21, verse 30, so 2130 in the concordance, I get Ziphite, and it means the inhabitants of the city of Ziph, or of the wilderness of Ziph, in which the city was located. They were descendants of Judah, and it says here that just like David, they were supposed to be his brothers, but he refers to them as strangers or foreigners because they betrayed him twice. They were King Saul's spies, and they alerted Saul every time David took refuge in their land. And so, this is the Hebrew, and then in 1 Samuel 23:19, then came up the Ziphites to Saul to Gibeah, saying, Doth not David hide himself with us in strongholds in the woods, in the hill of Hachilah, which is on the south of Jeshimon? And in 1 Samuel 26:1, and the Ziphites came unto Saul to Gibeah, saying, Doth not David hide himself in the hill of Hachilah, which is before Jeshimon? And then in Psalms 54:1, to the chief musician on Neginoth Mashil, a psalm of David, when the Ziphims came and said to Saul, Doth not David hide himself with us? Save me, O God, by thy name, and judge me by thy strength. And then in Greek, it means good at imparting, that is liberal, ready to distribute. So in 1 Timothy 6:18, that they do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to distribute, willingly to communicate. And if I look up 144, it is Adar, which means high and eminent. And then in Ezra 6:15, and this house was finished on the 3rd day of the month Adar, which was in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. And then in Greek, it's perception, that is figurative discernment, judgment. In Philippians 1:9, and this I pray, that your love may abound yet more and more in knowledge and in all judgment. And 4:11 in Hebrew is these or those. And in Genesis 19:8, behold, now I have 2 daughters which have not known man. Let me, I pray thee, bring them out unto you, and do you to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing, for there came they under the shadow of my roof. And in Genesis 19:25, and he overthrew those cities, and all the plains, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. And in Genesis 26:3, sojourn in the land, and I will be with thee, and will bless thee, for unto thee and unto thy seed I will give all these countries. and I will perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father. And in Genesis 26:4, and I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. And then in Leviticus 18:27, for all these abominations have the men of the land done which were before you, and the land is defiled. And then in Deuteronomy 4:42, that the slayer might flee thither, which should kill his neighbor unaware, and hated him not in times past, and that fleeing unto one of these cities he might live. And in Deuteronomy 7:22, and the Lord thy God will put out those nations before thee by little and little, thou mayest not consume them at once, lest the beasts of the field increase upon thee. And in Deuteronomy 19:11, but if any man hate his neighbor, and lie in wait for him, and rise up against him, and smite him mortally, that he die, and fleeth into one of these cities. And in 1 Chronicles 28, these were born unto the giants in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David, and by the hand of his servants. And then in Greek, it means not expounded in full, that is indescribable, unspeakable. So in 2 Corinthians 9:15, thanks be unto you, God, for his unspeakable gift. So thanks be unto God for his unspeakable gift. And so therefore I have completed the word as commissioned by God. And so for those who have ears, let them hear.